Welcome to Compliance Therapy with Igor Volovich, presented by Qmulos. Qmulos, converged continuous compliance. Get it together.
Today, we're honored to welcome to the program a man who needs no introduction, a recognized thought leader, a respected industry analyst, an experienced technologist and executive, a veteran, and an all-around great guy, Dr. Zero Trust, or as his friends call him, Chase Cunningham. Dr. Zero Trust, you are now in session with Compliance Therapy. Welcome.
Well, A, thanks for the kind intro, and B, this is interesting because, usually the therapy I'm in involves a couch and someone telling me I need to do better. So,
well, that's what we can talk about. So, I mean, we have two doctors in the building right now, so I don't know who's on whose couch. Very cool. Well, thanks for making the time for us. Welcome to the program. It's great to have you. It's great to catch up. Of course, you and I go back many years. I think back to Mach 37, I think is where we first met.
That's right. We both have battle scars from Mach 37.
That's right. That's right. And of course, you want to tell folks what Mach 37 was in your life?
Yeah. So Mach 37 was a tech accelerator that myself and my good friend Heather Dahl got involved in. We had built an application for kids and families to do encrypted security stuff. And it was a great learning experience, but it didn't unfortunately wind up making us into ultra billionaires. So it was an exercise in learning, if nothing else.
That's what Mach 37 was about. Take folks from the paper napkin to their first PO, hopefully, or at least get them to work through the problem set. That's very cool. So, how does a Navy crypto chief go from that to helping secure kids?
I mean, my whole life and career, I've just been lucky to be blessed by being around, way smarter, more capable people. And at every turn, seems like I've been introduced to new opportunities. We created the Sinja comic to kind of keep kids engaged in cyber, which did really well. It was in 4 languages, and we had kids sending us pictures of their Sinja birthdays. We got to Comic-Con a few years in a row, and after that, we had parents at every Comic-Con come up and saying, "Is there an app for Sinja for our kids?" And at the time, we were like, "No, there's not." And then Heather said, "Well, we should just make one." So we did, and we put a bunch of proprietary encryption stuff behind the scenes that we built, and it was there. It was ran. My kids used it. We had some users, but I think we were just ahead of the market, and it didn't take off the way that we hoped it would. If we'd have been, 3 years ago, it'd be a different story. But this was back in 15.
Yeah, something like that. Ahead of its time. No, you guys, I remember it. I was one of the vendors of Mach 37. That's how we met. And I remember being very impressed. And also, it was a bit of a whiplash moment for me where I kind of did a double take. Wait a second, Chase Cunningham, with the background that you have, and Heather Dahl, the background that she had.
Right.
But you guys came together under the umbrella of basically storytelling. You figured out how to tell a story and reach a market. I mean, we're talking about kids and parents, not exactly a sophisticated buyer when it comes to cybersecurity, but you managed to figure it out.
Yeah, well, and that's one of those things where, again, I say, like, I'm not joking when I say, like, I'm lucky I'm surrounded by better, smarter people, because Heather was the one that put together all of that market material. She's the one that polished all of the decks and stuff. I was just there as the security wonk to make sure that things were put together the way that they needed to be, because we were going to have kids and parents' data in that whole thing. And it, like I say, it was great, because that was my, I would say, first real commercial gig after I retired. Because after I medically retired, I went to work for the government again as a contractor. And then this was my first real tranche of go off and be an entrepreneur, sort of, and, build something for the market. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot of what to do and what not to do.
That is the point. I mean, you got battle scars from battles, and you got battle scars from during the startup experience.
Yeah, my bank account has got the battle scars from the commercial stuff. Yep.
Yeah, I know how that works. We've definitely, being a part of the program, and I think I went through 4 cohorts altogether. And of course,
wow,
that was the guy who brought me in, and he started the whole program, and we're still great friends, and we still collaborate a lot. And so I still hear about some of the cohort members and what they've gone on to do. And of course, we had some great hits, and we've had some folks who just learned a lot. And that's also important. I think that's kind of the point of the program. But I'm glad that you and I got to meet, and you got to experience that program and learn a few things about how it works in the commercial space, which I think a lot of folks who I think start out their careers on your side of the world, doing the military thing and being involved in the intelligence community, coming out of the fort, coming out of these programs that are very classified and kind of ensconced and maybe somewhat isolated from that outside environment, the commercial environment, understanding how things work from a product perspective, not just creating a great piece of technology, but also something that's sellable and how to tell that story. I think that's the common theme. And I was really impressed to see what you guys did back then with the storytelling around the concept, because again, you got to sell it to the kids, you got to sell it to the parents. And that's not an easy sell. They're definitely inundated with a lot of messaging from cereal to cybersecurity apparently now.
Yeah, it never ends. I mean, it's a real exercise if you've never tried to polish a product to get it to the younger generation and families. It's a lot of work.
Very cool. Well, as I understand, after that, you joined Forrester for a while.
Yep, I was at Forrester I was at Forrester for 4-ish years. Great job, amazing people. I really liked it because it was very much almost, this sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it very much reminded me of how it was in the military, where they said, here's what you need to do, and here's what we expect out of you, and go. And they just let you go. And that was, for me, that was great, because that's the way I prefer to get things done.
It's good to know what the mission is. So what sectors were you focusing on when you were at Forrester?
I started out just kind of general network security and security for specific sort of red team use case side things. And very quickly, I was fortunate enough that they kind of said, look, this zero trust thing's been sitting around for a bit. Why don't you see what you could do with it? And, again, to their credit, Forrester let me kind of run at that with my own approach. And we were able to modify ZT for a framework, and then the framework really hit and started doing some good things in the market.
That's amazing. It's great to have that freedom to innovate and really kind of spread your wings and really coin a new term and really build up a practice around zero trust within Forrester and kind of across the industry. And I know your voice is heard in many different corners of our space, and I know you're very respected, and what you say definitely carries a lot of weight. So zero trust, obviously, Dr. Zero Trust. Tell us about how that came about. Of course, I know you've got your PhD in cybersecurity, but how did this come about?
Well, I mean, everybody's got to have a thing. And I was like, well, if I'm going to be good at something, I'm just going to be good at this. So I kind of said, I'll just take ZT and make that part of my shtick. And then I was doing so much stuff with different organizations on ZT, between advisory and consulting and guidance and go to market and all the ZT things. I was like, I jokingly said to somebody, I should have a doctorate in zero trust. And they were like, well, just be Dr. Zero Trust. So I just kind of said, okay, yeah, I'll do that. And then I grabbed it and went forward. And it's turned out to be a useful moniker. At least it's helped when folks look around for ZT, they typically will find something I've written or published or etc.
That's very cool. Easy to find, and then definitely easy to read. I mean, at least if you know what you're reading, a lot of folks, of course, and you've made it very accessible. I think that's the point of zero trust, that folks get wrapped around the technology. And of course, the vendors are not helping with that, because everybody who's anybody is putting zero trust on whatever they've got and trying to chase that bandwagon and jump on it and make it part of their branding, part of their messaging. It's become more of a marketing thing than anything else. And kind of the truth in advertising should definitely extend towards the cybersecurity market, but it hasn't. And I think that's where some of that credibility gap occurs between the market and the vendors. So speaking of vendors, where do you work now, and what do you do, and how does zero trust enter into your life today?
Yeah, so I mean, now I work for Ericom Software, and we've built a stack for small and mid-sized businesses, because to me that was just a passion product of I wanted our capabilities to be priced and aimed at the market where it was likely to get the most impact, which is small and mid-sized business. And really what we've done there was we've taken the capability sets around keeping users from interacting with malicious content, remote browser isolation, those types of things, segmentation, and then tying that into the ZTNA identity and access management stack, and being able to do that where, because we have no hardware, because we have, a very malleable space and a very cloud enabled, forward approach to the problem, we can offer that to small businesses at an extremely affordable price point. And when I say extremely affordable, I can do the whole stack for a small and mid-sized business for like $4 per user per month.
That's impressive. So you're actually making Zero Trust consumable as much as John Kinnervag, the father of Zero Trust, your good friend and colleague, and other folks in the industry are saying, look, you can't really buy security. You're making Zero Trust actually accessible and consumable by folks who kind of need it the most.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the trends, and I mean, when I wrote my cyber warfare book, like I said in that book that the bad guys were going to go downstream, and that's exactly what's happened. And why? That's because big enterprise has been able to throw big money at the problem, and they've got the heft to do it. So if you're the bad guy, what do? You don't continue to beat your head up against a brick wall. You go, well, I'll go downstream because they're networked into you. And how do you do that? You do that with excessive privileges and accesses and VPNs and shared passwords and blah, blah, blah. And you do that from the small and mid-sized business. So it does, in my opinion, it didn't make a lot of sense to continue to try and sell into big enterprise. I mean, obviously I can do things for big enterprise, but I just didn't see that opportunity was going to make a substantial difference for those that needed it most. And then on the far side was just a challenge for what we were doing. Can you do this and deliver it at a price point that is not cost prohibitive for that market? And it was a lot of another opportunity to learn. It was another opportunity to try different things and to modify the approach on the fly.
That's important. Well, and agility is something that smaller firms, of course, have that luxury, right? And I think when we were both doing startups, I think that's something that we learned very early on. Coming from large environments, you came from the Navy, I came from big companies like Microsoft and IBM and Schneider Electric, where I was a CISO. You can't turn the Titanic on a dime. You have to plan for these things, and these pivots are tough to come by, and they're very expensive. So somebody at a very high level has to take a lot of risk on personally as a leader to try to engineer that kind of a directional change. And the outcomes are not certain. We know that more than half the mergers sometimes fail. And, although that statistic's been kind of challenged in the last few years, but still, even if it's half, it's still bad enough.
It's still significant.
Yeah. And so it's tough to do. And, but smaller companies, they have that freedom, and the freedom to innovate, the freedom to pivot, the freedom to access the market in different ways. And I think what you were describing is that kind of freedom that it's tough to access for large enterprises as well, because they're looking for the big names. They're looking for the established players, kind of the back in the day that say nobody got fired for buying IBM.
Yeah.
And now nobody gets fired for buying, Azure or AWS or Google Cloud, but there are other capabilities that folks need to be aware of. And we're seeing, of course, a lot of consolidation in the marketplace. And of course, from your seat as a Forrester analyst, of course, you saw a lot of that, and I'm sure you still maintain some visibility to it. But what are your thoughts about this particular problem? How do you make sure that innovation continues to be available, that you can take advantage of it as it arrives onto the marketplace? How do you maintain visibility to it as a large enterprise that needs these capabilities, but all they know about is, the Microsoft, the AWS, the Google, et cetera, right? How do they fix that gap?
Yeah, I think number one is not to be married to that approach that I still run into this all the time of folks will go, where are you on the magic quadrant, or where are you on the wave? And it's like, I tell them flat out, I'm not there. If you're looking for my product on a MQ right now, it ain't there. So if that's your point one of decision making, go somewhere else. And it's not that those aren't valuable reports, but the point is, if you really are looking at innovative things and you're looking at big picture, you need to open your aperture, and you can't have that first line in the sand of, if it is not in an analyst report, I won't consider it. So my response to those folks would be, open up your aperture, think outside of that sort of box, and then, consider other things. And then the other side is, you really should be leveraging virtual solutions that can let you test these things in place and do it in a simulated environment. If you're not doing that, you never know how it's going to work. You never know how it's actually going to. The biggest problem that everyone runs into is deployment and making sure that things configure. So why not do that in a virtual space? Because that's what it's built for. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the stuff that Craig Stevenson does at Hypercube, because you can build a whole virtual environment, demo all the stuff you want, and if it doesn't work, you just nuke the whole thing and move on about your day.
Yeah, that's definitely. I mean, emulation, attack simulation, breach attack simulation, that's an emerging marketplace now. We're seeing a lot of players in there. I happen to be on the advisory board of a company called rThreat. I'm sure you know those guys.
I know rThreat. Yep.
Mm-hmm. They're doing great work. And I think actually John Kinderberg has joined us on the advisory board there. I think a lot of that, the idea of what visibility means has kind of morphed over the years. We used to do kind of that standard, let's do an asset inventory. It's very static, we've got things in a data center. We can go and touch them if we wanted to. But these days, you can take a ride to Ashburn and you can walk by the data center and maybe you can even get a pass to get in. What good does that do? Because the data is everywhere and it belongs to you in terms of risk and responsibility and accountability, right? It lands squarely on that matrix for you. But in terms of where it actually sits, how you put your hands around it, that's changed completely. And so I think with it, so changed the idea of what does asset visibility mean? What does threat visibility mean? And how do you also understand the outcomes and predict them, not just from a perspective of a threat model and some kind of a theoretical formula of, the annual loss expectancy and things like that, but can you actually predict the success of your program based on the tools and the technology and the strategy that you've selected? And that's not a rhetorical question. I am really posing it. I mean, and I don't know if there is an answer. Do you think there is one?
I mean, I think that the answer, I think, the answer is the question, right? I mean, that sounds like a total cop-out answer, but it is to say that the way that you're doing it has to be focused on, the bigger, broader problem set. And are you really applying things that will eliminate the adversary's advantages? I mean, I think that that's one of the things that we still don't wrap our head around very well in most security advisories that I've been working in, where folks are always looking for the perfection of defense and the, how to not have a breach and how not to whatever. And we have 30 years of proof that that's not going to work. So in reality, looking at those things, whether they're devices or workloads or blah, blah, if you think about, okay, well, what does the bad guy have to be successful? And let me remove as much of that as possible. I'm just trying to make their job as an adversary hard enough that they'll go somewhere else. And it might suck for whoever else is next, but it ain't me.
Do you suffer from seasonal compliance fatigue and chronic compliance headaches? You're not alone. Countless IT, compliance, and cybersecurity professionals just like you continue to suffer from legacy compliance, audit, and assessment workflows, excessive compliance paperwork, and manual evidence collection. Sadly, most have just accepted the idea that compliance management must always be difficult and unpleasant, but it doesn't have to be. Qmulos, an industry leader in converged continuous compliance, has developed revolutionary treatment options to relieve your compliance-related stress, delivering a fully automated end-to-end compliance experience. Don't delay. Call today for a free consultation with one of our compliance therapists and start your journey to converged continuous compliance by Qmulos. Call toll-free 1-844-476-8567 or visit Qmulos.com to start your healing journey. That's Qmulos.com. Qmulos, the compliance automation you need, the compliance experience you'll love.
Buy your way out of a security problem. You can't just stack your stack very high and hope that complexity deters somebody. No, actually, complexity works against you. You want fewer things to manage and better outcomes. And I think there's been insufficient focus on that. A lot of folks have kind of chased that technology, the latest, shiniest, brand new things, in the hopes that it would deter or it would significantly degrade the adversary's capabilities. And it just doesn't work that way. The complexity tends to work against you.
Yeah. I mean, that's where, for me, it always really occurs to me when I ask an organization, they say, well, have we done a red team? And they'll say, well, we've done a pen test. And I say, that's not what I asked. Have we done a red team? well, we think that that would be detrimental to the sort of operation of business, blah, blah. My question to them is, do you think it would be detrimental to the business if the bad guys owned you? Because that's what they're trying to do. And all for pen tests, they make sense. They're useful. However, if you don't put yourself in a posture where you're defending from the reality of a threat, which would be a red team type of activity, you never know what's going to happen. And the other benefit there is if you go through that exercise, a real exercise, you see where people fall or respond. You talked about being in the Navy. Well, I remember very, very specifically the first time we did actual training in a building that was on fire, that was for training purposes, seeing people freak out that days before that had been talking about how they were so excited to go fight the fire and combat this and whatever else. The moment that it actually became on fire, they, literally there were folks that turned around and ran. And it's like this, I'd rather do this now than do this when we're out at the sea when people's lives are actually on the line.
No substitute for the real thing, right?
I mean, that's what you want. It's not comfortable and it's not easy. But that's change, and I say this to my family, my kids, whatever, like any change you put in place that's significant, it's going to suck. So just deal with the suck and then move past it. And that's the reality of it. No, even if it's, something very simple, like trying to get in shape. I mean, how many people become gym rats for the month of January and then they're done by February?
I think that's the entire business model for every gym ever.
Yeah. It sounds like that's pretty much how they approach the business. They make a lot of money that way.
Certainly do. They certainly do. Well, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this concept that I've been kicking around for a while and talking to a few folks in the industry, and I'll lay it out here with you. The idea of a time factor in how we think about security. We talked about just now this idea of binary security, or we either secure or we're not, and it's not quite that way, right? There's grades of kind of shades of gray when it comes to that. And when we talk about mitigating threats, and maybe the idea of a perimeter has gone away, but the threats still follow a certain pattern. We can call it an attack pattern, or we can call it a kill chain. But you can certainly interrupt that kill chain, kind of like in aviation. The accident chain can be broken. If you had done the weather briefing before you set off, you would know that there is a cumulus cloud coming down, and you don't need to be in it, right? And you're not trained for that, or you're not rated for that, your equipment is not. You can break that chain before you ever get off the ground. And even when you're in flight, you can still turn around. There's plenty of opportunities when you look at those accident reports, which I do because I enjoy understanding how things happen, right? You understand that failure mode and the effects analysis. And when it comes to security, we don't seem to spend enough time doing that. And also we seem to ignore the time factor, it seems. And the time factor being, can I predictively understand what an incident would look like, what a breach would look like, what a compromise would look like? And I think these are distinct terms, of course, as we know. But also, if I can understand it, what can I do about it? And understanding the limitations of my own program, how much can I actually exert a level of influence over these outcomes? And being very honest, very transparent, very credible when we have that conversation. I think that's a I don't want to call it a lost art, because I don't think that's ever existed. I don't think we've ever taken that kind of a strategic approach as security leaders. I've seen very few programs who talk about it. I've seen zero programs that actually run that way. And I think it's because of the complexity, right?